This weather is about to make a huge turn. If we expand the view this morning on the satellite picture, we're going to talk about in this update the tropics over the next 2 weeks, as well as a detailed layout of what's going on in the U.S. over this week, but as well as a sneak peek what's maybe to come for next week. So let's take a look at the setup and delve into the details. We've got a ridge of high pressure that's been pretty predominant, fairly dry across a good part of the West Coast and portions of the desert Southwest. That ridge has been pretty prevalent over Texas and much of the southeastern states, but it's the northern periphery of that ridge we've seen a little bit of a weakness, and that's where the instability is. We've got light to moderate showers happening for the Intermountain West, but it's this convective energy that's blowing up across eastern portions of the Rockies, and we've just seen this conveyor belt of moisture. I mean, over the weekend, Oklahoma City just got crushed with record rainfall for August, and they're seeing another convective complex hit portions of Oklahoma as well as into Arkansas. While the remnants of Debbie has subsided, we are left over with some sporadic showers and thunderstorms across New York, getting into Vermont and New Hampshire. And if we take a look at the tropics, you can see it's actually fairly quiet. It's just this area of disturbed weather, which is now potential tropical cyclone 5, is still east of the Lesser Antilles, but all indications are this is moving fairly quickly west northwest bound. And the latest update from the National Hurricane Center puts it at 26 miles an hour, folks. That is booking it for a tropical system. You can see the timeline here. We already have tropical storm watches and warnings in effect for areas of the Virgin Islands as well as into Puerto Rico. But all indications are once it passes those islands on Tuesday and Wednesday, by Thursday, it could become a Hurricane Ernesto. And then all indications are it's going to get close to major hurricane status. But you can see the huge turn that it takes well out into the open waters of the Atlantic. And at this point, it may even miss even Bermuda as it looks to maybe even turn just to the right. But we'll be keeping a monitor on this system. But for right now, I think for a good part of the U.S., I don't think you have to worry about what may be to come for Ernesto. What we have to be concerned about is just the heat that's really just going to be baking more or less all week long for the deserts, much of the south central states and into the southeast. But it's nothing but the heat in a cooler air going to be predominantly across the central and northern areas of the country, especially the Great Lakes into the Ohio Valley, where we see these troughs dive down, and you're in the northern periphery, you're in the northwest flow. You're going to be in the kind of the bullseye, if you will, of those cooler anomalies. You can see today, and it's not just today, I think it's much of all week long, we've got the cooler flow coming in off the Pacific. It's warm over the top over in Canada, but it's much cooler underneath, and especially as you get across the middle of the country, of those 10 to 15 degrees below average, complements of all the rain that you're going to get and all the cloud cover across good part of Iowa, Missouri, getting into Oklahoma as well as into Arkansas, and look at much of the Tennessee Valley as well as into the Northeast. Exceptions for the deep south and much of the southeast. But if you break it down, even all week going into between now and Saturday, over the next 5 days, that predominant flow continues, which much cooler light conditions across a good part of the West, the Pacific Northwest, portions of the Intermountain West, and it really gets elevated as we get into the Great Lakes. We've got lower pressures going to be funneling in, northwest flow setups, a lot of instability coming into across this region that would extend through the Ohio Valley and a good part of the Northeast. So if we break it down day by day on the northern periphery, so you're going to be locked under that ridge across a good part of New Mexico, Texas, and portions of Oklahoma, storms are going to be firing across the desert Southwest. Much of the monsoonal flow, not as much as you would like to see, but at least there's something around. But it's really east of the Rocky Mountains. That's where I think things get elevated on the northern periphery of that ridge, where storms and heavier rain showers are going to form in eastern Colorado, travel through Kansas, getting into eastern portions of Oklahoma, and eventually end up in Missouri as well as into Arkansas. And then that low pressure center is close enough off the coast of the Carolinas to give them an enhancement of showers and thunderstorms, especially across South Carolina and well as into North Carolina. But as that ridge continues to build all week long, this is Tuesday, and as it builds and lifts a little bit further north, it's going to put the placement of the storm track further north as well. So now it's kind of the same setup. They're going to blow up east to the Rocky Mountains, traverse down that northwest flow, and then really elevate once they turn southeastward. And that's where you're going to be picking up the heaviest rains, likely in eastern Kansas, much of Missouri by then, and getting into northern areas of Arkansas. And it just expands as we head into Wednesday, as the ridge continues to build a little bit to the south. That puts the placement even further north. So now it's going to be more or less all of Missouri. Now we're talking all of Iowa, getting into Illinois and traversing further north into the Dakotas, as well as into Minnesota. And again, as the ridge going into Thursday builds even further across the central U.S., that puts the placement now over a good part of Wisconsin, as well as into Illinois, Michigan, Indiana, and now we're talking pieces of Kentucky going into that Thursday afternoon. And then with lower pressure extending into the Great Lakes again, with what will be Ernesto out here, you can see the ensembles, all ensembles keep it well away from the United States and keeping that huge turn in place, while we're seeing another little weak cool front traveling down into the central U.S., which may spark additional showers and thunderstorm activity across Kansas and portions of Oklahoma, getting into that Friday time frame. And as we head into Friday with that ridge moving, shifting, and with that lower pressure extending through the Great Lakes, that's going to shift the storm track even further east now. Now we're talking places into Ohio, much of Pennsylvania, get into West Virginia, much of Kentucky, Tennessee, and it could even drift down into portions of at least the northern half of Alabama and heading into the Georgia area on Friday. But going into Saturday for the weekend, it just comes back, right? The ridge slightly moves off west, but it just builds and expands again, while we have yet another trough come down from the Great Lakes. Lower pressures again keeps the flow, keeps the cooler air still funneling in, into the Great Lakes region, into the Ohio Valley. Much of the Mid-Atlantic and much of the Northeast remain on the overall cooler side for August standards, while much of the Southwest and much of the South and the Southeast will be continuing to bake under that ridge of high pressure. So obviously those areas will continue to remain on the drier side, while you're having that weakness and that northwest flow. That's where you're going to be on the bullseye side of those showers and thunderstorms really all week long. So this is a combination between now and going through Saturday, well above average rains highlighted across Kansas, Nebraska, much of the Dakotas through Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri, Illinois, Wisconsin, getting into Michigan, Indiana, Ohio, and portions of Kentucky and Tennessee. Those are going to be your favorite areas where most of the instability is going to be all week long, as the ridge will be building back again over Texas. Widespread 100-degree heat. It's not too bad across the desert Southwest, and really it's not actually too bad across the Intermountain West. I remember Boise, there were 105, 108, so that's not anywhere near those numbers. Just struggling to get the 90 degrees, but it's just the middle part of the country. You're going to be into that ridge of high pressure, and then where you just have those troughs coming down, those waves of energy, you're going to be experiencing those fall-like conditions continue for a good part across this region. Widespread 70s, 80s, no question about it, even as we head into the weekend. But yes, where you're in that dry slot and where that ridge of high pressure is, you're going to be begging for rain. And yes, I'm talking for you guys out there off the West Coast and much of the South Central states and into the Southeast. Under that heat dome, you got a lot of sinking air, but away from that, just a conveyor belt of moisture through Oklahoma, those areas that I mentioned across Missouri, back into Iowa, Illinois, those are going to be your favorite areas of the storm track all week long. And then going into next week, just comes back, right? When we were in the heart of a summer, the hottest time of the year, the ridge of high pressure will be expanding again over a good part of the Southwest and much of the South Central states. I think it would likely expand back into areas of Wyoming by then, into Montana, while areas again off the, getting into the Great Lakes, the Ohio Valley, much of the Northeast, maybe the Tennessee Valley will continue to remain on the much cooler side. So you got the Pacific flow bringing the cooler anomalies out west and much of the Pacific Northwest heading into the middle of next week. And then you got the ridge of high pressure just pretty much dominating across this region. And then on the backside of that northwest flow with these troughing inversions that come down, yes, that continues to put the Great Lakes, the Ohio Valley, the Mid-Atlantic, and much of New England, the Northeast, on the much cooler side and an unstable side, and keeping the rain around and the instability, the cloud cover to keep the temperatures down. But out in the tropics, I mean, folks, this is Ernesto, and that's kind of like the only game in town. I mean, if we look at some of the ensembles, really over the next 2 weeks, this looks to be, at least for right now, the only system that could come to fruition and possibly be a major hurricane, and maybe not even impact much of anybody besides the Virgin Islands and the Puerto Rico as a tropical storm. But it maybe even be on the right side of Bermuda by the time it gets close. But you can see for the rest of the Atlantic for the next 2 weeks, it's kind of high and dry, and that actually puts us to the end of August. So I know the forecast was pretty bullish, and we'd have to get to 2 storms every single week by the time we head into end of August through the heart of hurricane season, just to get to, say, 18 storms, because we've only had 5, right? We'll have 5 after they name Ernesto probably sometime today or tomorrow. But yes, as we head deeper into the next week, the ridge of high pressure is going to stay pretty prominent over a good part of the south and southeast. That heat is just going to continue for you. And what's also going to continue is the cooler anomalies for much of the west and the Pacific Northwest, and actually much of the Ohio Valley, the Great Lakes, the Mid-Atlantic, and the Northeast, as the cooler, if not almost fall-like conditions at times, will continue likely for the foreseeable future. So guys, I appreciate you guys watching. Do like this video, definitely hit the subscribe button, and catch me next update while I protect you before and after the storm.